poorest in the world, and also do not have required resources to manage them. The other issue, and this is an example of Mumbai, which is one of the largest cities in the world, and in India, it is India's financial capital. These two are pictures from 1980s. We see the same kind of skyscrapers, and these are from the most recent one. The only difference what we see is Mumbai has added more skyscrapers, but the inequality between the poor and the rich remains almost the same. Right? So that's one of the major challenges. Right? In the last 30 years, both the shanty towns and the skyscrapers have grown parallelly, and that's creating a more inequality gap within the city. Another challenge is with social changes. That along with movement of people, there are going to be scarce resources, and we will end up with this kind of queue for drinking water. There's people standing in line to catch water from a natural spring, or with infrastructure. And also, when you have so many people, 10 million people or 30 million people, how do we manage them? Whether when it comes to political organization or other social movements. And also, this is the reason in which there's we have regular terrorist attacks, and also it's very prone to conflict, whether it's between India and Pakistan, and also through other social and political organizations. As a result, this is what happens now. How do we manage those things? And then the last one, as Bob said in the beginning, along with those mega cities, we shouldn't forget with the small cities, right? So with small cities, I'm going to return to Nepal, and these are the pictures. These are the two towns from my home village, right? And this is where I grew up, and these are the pictures. This is in the last 30 years. This is what happened to a small town, which is just a strip of a house or businesses, has transformed into a huge urban area or a city in the last 30 years. And that's this urbanization that's happening all over the countries, right? Whether it's in Bangladesh or India or Nepal, and one of the future one of the things that we can learn from Sri Lanka, as said, was Sri Lanka is one of the least urbanized country in the world, and the reason that I found that they were least urbanized is because they have a well-networked infrastructure connecting rural and urban areas, so that makes that prevents people moving from rural area to urban area. So maybe something that we can learn from Sri Lanka that can manage movement of people and also minimize all these socio-economic and environmental problems that may arise from this movement of people from rural to urban areas. So with that, I'll leave. Thank you.
Again, we're holding our questions. If you came in a little late, we're holding our questions until the end. And so these are very big numbers. I mean, we're talking pretty serious stuff. I mean, it doesn't take long to get into a discussion like this. And you see that we are talking about major trends with really global significance, but trends that are not totally new. The Western world went through a massive period of urbanization. The figures on London are just as staggering as those on Chicago that I mentioned 20 minutes ago. So lest we get overwhelmed by some of these trends, we will come back at the end and talk about other possible solutions in different kind of scenarios. So with that, we're now going to turn to the largest country in the world, China, and David Chunyu. Thank you, David.
Bob. Well, hello everybody. I think Bob meant China to be the country with the largest population in the world. I'm just going to talk about the focusing on the demographic side of this urbanization trend. First of all, the data. Well, just want to give you this urbanization, the trend of urbanization in China for the past 60, 70 years. And there's something very special about the year 2011. And 2011, the year 2011 is actually the first time ever in the Chinese history that the majority of the population start to live in the cities. And this is actually very special for me personally because I'm from China, that's one thing. The other thing is for most of my life, I'm now in my later 30s. For most of my life, I have been remembering China as an agricultural society. But no longer. Starting with in the year 2011, the urbanization rate in China is more than 50%. And the current number 2012, that was almost 53%. But interestingly, in the year 2010, the urbanization rate was actually 49.95%. Okay, well, overall speaking, this number is still significantly lower than the other countries like North America or Europe or even Northern Africa. But you can see this over time trend, the growth has been very rapid, just as described in other regions, in Africa, in Asia. So pretty much within the period of 60 years, the urbanization rate in China has increased from about 11% to the current more than 50%. All right, the next question is how do we explain it? How do we explain this rapid increase of urban population in China? One possible reason might be the population growth. Okay, but this is certainly not the case in China because most of you probably have heard about this family planning policy in China, especially China used to have this one-child policy. So it's certainly not because of the population growth. The main factor is just because of the migration from the rural area into the urban areas. And well, to give you this big number, out of the more than 700 million urban population in China, more than 221 million are actually migrants from other areas. So there's actually a special term given to this population. It's called the floating population. It's called the floating population because this is something related to a unique Chinese system. It's called the house registration system. It's also known as the hukou. What is this house registration system? It's some kind of a citizenship status. But the citizen status is actually tied to the local place. That is, it is probably the primary determinant of one's opportunity, rights, and access to public services, social benefits, etc. So it's a very, very important factor. In the past, the hukou actually determines your access to public housing, children's access to education, healthcare, social security, unemployment insurance, etc. A whole bunch of benefits. So the definition of the floating population is related to where they are registered. And it turns out all these migrants, by definition, their place of registration is in other places. But they spend most of their time in the cities. And the majority of this floating population are actually from the rural areas. So this is another big feature about this Chinese system. That is, they're registered in the rural area, but they're living in the cities. At the same time, their opportunity, their rights, and the access to certain public services is still tied to their registration in their hometown. In other words, they will not be able to enjoy the same rights and opportunity as the local residents in the cities. So I'm going to give you some other information about this inequality, disparity, segregation. But I would just want to give you this big picture. This is a map I made myself for a case study of the floating population in China, which I participated. So here we see some three flows of the migrant population, which is really a tiny proportion of the total migrant population in China. You know, that's like the total migrant population, even from the rural area, that's still more than 140 million people. But this is a tiny proportion. But it's very typical. That is, this migration movement is typically concentrating in the eastern region of China. And another aspect is it tend to concentrate in the large cities. So it's very unequal concentration. By large cities, I mean the population, the city population with at least 1 million people. And currently in China, there are almost 200 cities, each with at least 1 million people. And to give you some quick examples, on the top, there's the red dot, that's Beijing, capital city of China. Its current population is more than 15 million. But the migrant population is more than 7 million, so that's more than 30% of the total population in the city. And this city, Dongguan, is in the Guangdong province. Well, we have been hearing this, China is called the world factory. Actually, a lot of the manufacturing production has been done in this city for a long time. And this city, more than half of its total population are actually the migrants from other areas, especially from the rural areas. So this is the trend, concentrating towards a certain region, especially in the large cities. Very unequal settlement. And then I'm going to give you some kind of a demographic or sociological analysis about this mechanism of the movement and their outcome. And here I just want to give you this summary. That is, when you think about the internal migration in China, just think of it as international migration from Mexico to the United States. And it turns out there's a lot of similarity between these two movements. It sounds really sort of odd, but actually there's a lot of similarity in terms of the mechanism of the movement and their incorporation experience at destination. So first of all, the generation of the immigrant flow. So because there's a lot of disparity in terms of between the sending area and the receiving area. And there's also the surplus labor from the sending area because of the modernization of the agricultural production. And in terms of the migrant networks, because most of them are from rural area, there's a very tight-knit social network among the people. In other words, it's mostly the people who are coming from the same village. They'll go to the same destination, having similar kind of job because they support each other with information on employment, housing, and public services. So very strong social network. And but there's also the similarity about their marginalization in the destination because they experience a lot of segregation. I'm going to give you more information about segregation and disparity, comparing to what the local residents experience. And at the same time, they experience prejudice and discrimination from the local residents. But discrimination here actually includes both individual discrimination, that is on personal level, and institutional discrimination, that's at the by the government or by the industry, okay, all right, that's okay. And finally, the similarity is circular migration is because they tend to be doing seasonal work in the destination, but they go back and forth sometimes because of the holiday, because of the harvest season in their hometown, so they go back and forth. But nowadays, this is becoming a more permanent trend. They're going to be living in the city for a long time. Probably some of them will never go back to the country anymore. So I'm going to be very quick. A lot of segregation in terms of occupation. They tend to have the less skilled jobs with lower income, less job security. In terms of the housing, they're most likely to be renting housing units and living in the urban peripheral areas, which is very crowded, less desirable, but the advantage is lower cost. And some other marginalization characteristics I mentioned because they do not have the urban hukou. They do not have the registration in the local area. So they do not have the entitlement to certain benefits of social security, health insurance, or the opportunity to send their own kids to the local schools, and all kinds of social isolation, which is due to maybe a spatial separation because they live in a different part of the city than the local residents. And another part can be language because many of them speak a different dialect than the local residents. And another interesting thing is the new generation, because this movement has been going on for more than 30 years. So there are at least 2 generations of the migrants. And the new generation have new aspiration in the city because they are no longer doing the circular movement. They prefer to stay in the city for forever, even though they come from the rural area, but many of them actually do not have any farm work experience at all. So this is the new trend. And they really just want to become some kind of a urban citizen. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of isolation. So right now, the big issue is the migrants' children. 2 groups of migrants' children. One is the group of children that accompany the parents when coming to the cities. And the big challenge is they do not have equal access to public education as the local residents. And the other group of the migrants' children is those that are left behind by their parents. And it turns out the majority of the children that are left behind are taken care of by the grandparents, which is a big issue because there is no close supervision by the adults. So that has an effect on their quality of education. The second thing is it's simply about the safety issue because no one is actually monitoring closely, and there's a lot of very, very tragic, unfortunate incidents because of the absence of parent supervision. So, well, the prospect is going to be great. So the government is really seeking to loosen this restriction of hukou. The basic agenda is this. In the past, the government is using the migrant population as cheap labor. That's it. It's just for the sake of industrialization, manufacturing, economic growth. But nowadays, the government is realizing it's important to incorporate the people into the city life as full member of the urban community. So now there's all kinds of a policy and approach, giving them hukou or giving them some kind of a green card, like what is going on in the United States right now. There's a lot of discussion about what do we do about the illegal immigrants in this country. Some path to citizenship or whatever. So there's a lot of attempt to move them into full membership into the urban community. And then that concludes my presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Very interesting. We parallel with Mexico. I mentioned that China was the largest country in the world, and I did mean population. About 1.4 billion, David? 1.3, 4?
Yeah, between 1.3 and 1.4.
And India is the second largest. Krishna, 1.2. Can I ask the audience what the third largest country in the world is? Anybody know? No hints, no hints. Not Brazil. Brazil's the largest country in South America. I think is Brazil 200 million? About 200 million? What is it? The United States. What's our population? 310, 315 million. So we're a very highly urbanized area as well. But as was mentioned, England, Great Britain, the UK more properly, is one of the most urbanized areas in the world in terms of the percentage of the population living in cities. As David mentioned, China is just really making that tip right now. England made it a long time ago. So England's got, people live in cities in England. Anyway, to Brad about some of the implications, particularly the environmental implications, because they sort of jump out at you.
Yes, so I am going to talk about really two different trends, not just urbanization, but also how urbanization intersects with climate change, which is my particular area of focus. I want to draw your attention to the image on the screen here, and if you notice, each of these is the projection of urban population for 2025 according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And there are two features that I think are incredibly important here. One, which has been sort of hinted at in the previous presentations, is the number of these cities that are coastal. If you look at the map up here, a lot of these large cities, particularly in the South Asian and East Asian subcontinents and along the west coast of Africa and the east coast of South America, are going to confront some complexity that arises from climate change. And the second thing I want you to note is how these cities are distributed in large part around the equator, which is going to have implications for how it is that temperature change impacts these different cities. And so this is approximately a graphic of how climate has changed over the past basic century. And one of the things that I want you to note is on here is population growth plotted as urban areas from 1970 through 2010. And what we see here is that some of the areas where we see large population growth do not intersect necessarily with areas of current or observed climate change, but some areas, particularly in Eastern Asia, do. And this is going to raise problems, particularly for the types of sea level rise and temperature extremes that they face. So, in order to kind of talk about two trends occurring at once, the way that, at least as an environmental researcher, I look at the problem is to talk about how it is that the hazards that arise from environmental processes intersect with what are known as exposure and vulnerability. That is, how frequently a group is confronted with a set of environmental hazards, and then also given a set of policies or given a set of previous decisions about, for instance, development, how that group is likely to be impacted in terms of their ability to recover, their ability to prevent, their ability to adapt. And for this particular presentation, I want to focus your attention on two issues that really do change what you see on the left-hand side, what are considered the hazards. And those are that arise from anthropogenic climate change, that is, human-caused climate change. The first of these has actually been in the news much recently, and that is international climate negotiations. The targets that are set by international climate negotiations will shape in large part what these hazards look like over the course of the 21st century. So since 2009, one of the things we've seen is that negotiations among specifically the large-scale polluters, the two nations that emit the largest volume of greenhouse gases, which happen to be China and the United States, they have trended in recent years towards negotiating directly with each other rather than through the United Nations